Back in 1971-72, there was, of course, a presidential election going on with Mr. Nixon and Mr. McGovern.
The political diciness of the population wondering whether they can trust their government and wondering whether their voice really matters. In America, it's kind of a little bit of, here we go again.
Sparky, Mr. Schultz, decided that maybe we should do something about politics.
So in a way, he poked fun a little bit.
And I think that's why that was a show that still has some traction.
It is pretty interesting to see this 35 years later.
That's why these shows keep going on, why the strips are still being read.
The main plot of You're Not Elected, Charlie Brown originally ran as a series of comic strips in October 1964.
Mr. Schultz had done some strips about Linus running for a student body president. He thought that the pressures that kids go through in these elections were kind of funny.
He was really, at least in the strip, very apolitical. But the process obviously fascinated him, the popularity contest part of it.
But I think that being the kind of shy, sensitive kid he was, and not popular and not the center of attention, I think that a lot of school was just hard to maneuver. It's hard to go through the day at school when everybody else seems to know what they're doing and be a part of things and you're on the outside looking in. So in a way, he poked fun a little bit at the intensity, the seriousness that schools take all these things. It's fun for the kids who succeed, but for the rest of the people, it's, I'm in the background watching the other people. These were all things that were really the core of the comic strip.
I think Charlie Brown would make a great candidate for student body president.
That sounds great, but I don't think I could win. I'd hate to run and find that nobody wanted me to be president.
The show aired in 1972 and certainly mocks some of the familiar political institutions.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. And so 35 years later, politics isn't that much different. We think we're very sophisticated today, but we're still doing the same thing.
Lucy's polling technique pokes fun at the bias of polling because she is determined to get the answer she wants however she can. A lot of the gags are the same between the television special and the comic strip, but the ending is completely different. Linus gives his speech about the Great Pumpkin, and that is where the story ends.
I decided to say a few words about the Great Pumpkin. Ugh!
But in the TV special, they actually go on to show the election being run and Linus winning.
I've lined you up with a talk show so you can have a chance to answer questions that some of the voters may have.
Back then, talk radio had just started. It's not the talk radio of today, the vitriolic nature of it today. It was more kind of a silly thing back in those days.
Talk radio back then was a new venue.
People would call in and just to hear their voices. They would forget the candidates' names because everybody was so nervous and everything. And Mr. Schultz thought that was very funny, so that all went into the show.
Do you want to talk to the candidate?
What? No, I'm calling Harold in St. Paul.
You have the wrong number.
It was a major decision to use children's voices in the Peanuts specials.
I had had some experience in directing little kids because we had done other shows with little kids.
They really looked to Bill for the vibe about exactly how that voice was going to play.
He had a way of explaining what your character was about. I mean, he was a great director in that way. So it wasn't like I was just repeating lines, and said, okay, I want you to repeat it like this and this inflection. And it was more like he allowed me to be it. Like he wanted me to really get that I was it. I was Sally.
Oh, forget that stupid locker. I've got something more important that I need your help with right now.
It was an interesting first Charlie Brown show for me to do because it had such an influence in my life.
If I'm elected, I promise to do the best I can.
It allowed me to make believe and dream and still stay myself. So I just am very grateful that I had the opportunity to do it.
I think one of the great things about the formula that worked for the Charlie Brown series was the music. The visuals gave it a certain look because they followed, people were familiar with Sparky's characters, but the music gave it a different dimension.
Vince Guaraldi, who did all the music for our first 17 shows, when we started to do You're Not Elected, he says, I have a song I want to do about Snoopy, about Joe Cool. I said, good, great, because we're going to have a scene where he's going to come to class. He says, no, I don't want to just play it, I want to sing it. I said, oh, no, he wants to sing it. I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, anyway, he brought in the demo and he sang it, and it was fabulous. So it went on the show, and it was one of the best things we ever did.
Joe Cool, back in school, hanging around the water fountain, playing the fool.
Those are the kind of things, that little songs, little pieces that you can put in the shows to give them a little distinction, a little personality.
And the song has a nice bluesy, hip feel to it. And while it's not as famous as some of the Christmas music, it has gone on and been covered by a variety of other artists. And in fact, Wynton Marsalis wrote an entire album titled Joe Cool's Blues.
It's amazing the power that the music had on future artists as young boys. The likes of David Benoit and George Winston and Wynton Marsalis heard all this music as kids and all wanted to get into that kind of a thing. And ironically, 20 years later, wrote the music for some of our Charlie Brown shows.
One of the problems that Bill Melendez and his crew encountered in animating Charlie Brown for television is that the characters weren't designed for animation.
It's a different medium. The comic strips is just one drawing, and you read it, and then you go to the next drawing. Whereas in animation, the characters are moving. There's turnarounds, there's walking, and they come to life.
What Bill did was to subtly adjust the proportions of the characters. He also worked out ways when if they turned very quickly. So you didn't see those ugly three-quarter views that Charlie Brown should never be seen in. And he managed to just keep the spirit of Schultz's designs without tracing.
My job as an animator is to illustrate it and try to make it come alive in animation. And it's always the same. I don't try to inject any additional thing to it other than its life.
So we were very true to Sparky's vision because that's what we were doing, that's what the show was.
And Mr. Schultz was smart enough to realize that the strip didn't have to slavishly look like his work, it just had to capture the spirit.
I have the results of my poll. You'll never be elected, Charlie Brown. You have no way of winning.
You're Not Elected, Charlie Brown was not the original title of the show.
We called it, for reasons I don't know, You're Elected, Charlie Brown, which is a kind of a dumb title when you realize he doesn't get elected.
You're Not Elected, Charlie Brown may have the world's record for the giving away the entire plot in the title. Of course you're not elected Charlie Brown. You're never going to be elected Charlie Brown. You're Charlie Brown.
William S. Paley called up and said, we really enjoyed your show, Mr. Mendelsohn, but you really should call it You're Not Elected, Charlie Brown. Don't you think so? And that's why there's an aspirand, because from then on it became that title.
You're elected, Charlie Brown. You're the biggest man in town.
You can still see remnants of this in that the song that is sung in the background still sings You're Elected, Charlie Brown.
We couldn't change the song. The song already said You're Elected, Charlie Brown. So that would have been too expensive a change, so we snuck that by.
What are you going to do about drinking fountains?
I'm for them.
Good. What will you do about recesses?
Longer recesses, I say.
In other specials, Linus plays the voice of sincerity. Here, while he's running for a political office, I think he still continues to be a voice of sincerity, and we know that he sincerely believes in the Great Pumpkin, even though that is not the most political thing to say.
Halloween will soon be with us, and on Halloween night, the Great Pumpkin rises out of the
Ironically, if you look over the years, the only time Linus loses is over the Great Pumpkin. It gets him every year.
And he gives the myth speech because he feels it's important to bring to the masses, and as long as he's got a platform for it, he's going to do it.
So it's really a soft message, but it was an important message that made a big impact on the audience. So it was very well received.
I'm sorry. I will not be able to appear before the school board. They meet at 8 o'clock, and I go to bed at 7:30.
It's enough of a satire from a children's point of view. It doesn't, Schultz managed to not be condescending ever to the children's point of view, but he respected it and he could deal with it. It was mostly a matter of just looking at this and saying, what part of this is universal? What part of this applies to every election and every popularity contest and every time, in third grade, if you run for something, you're being elected hall monitor, you go through this same silly process that is detailed in those strips and in the special.
Somebody once said that Charles Schultz was a great bell ringer, that he reminds us all of things that we long forgot about our childhood. And because there's so many childhood things in there, we all identify with that. And we all identify with the great struggles that Charlie Brown has, because we all have problems every day. And yet we get up the next day and we go on and so forth. So there's this consistency of character and of theme that has held everything together for half a century.